What would you do if someone knocked on your door late at night? Would you answer it without a second thought, or would a chill run down your spine, wondering who or what might be on the other side? Welcome to another collection of Strangers at the Door stories, where we explore true tales of uninvited visitors. These stories are a haunting mix of the supernatural and the disturbingly real, because sometimes the scariest knocks come not from ghosts or spirits, but from the living. Tonight I'm joined by a very special guest narrator, the talented Miss Creepy Tales. Please do check her channel out. And here's a warning. If you're listening to this and someone knocks at your door, maybe think twice before answering. Please subscribe for more true scary stories from Japan. Now lock your doors, dim the lights, and let's dive in. This happened during summer vacation when I was in the 4th grade. It was a hot, lazy afternoon, and I was at home with my younger sister, killing time while our parents went out. Living in the countryside, we often left the windows and the front door open on sweltering days to let the breeze in. That day was so quiet and still that it made me feel drowsy, and I found myself dozing off on the couch. My sister, however, was full of energy. She was being annoying as usual. "I'm going out to play," she suddenly announced, snapping me out of my half-sleep. There were some neighborhood kids that she often played with, so I didn't really think much of it. But before letting her go, I decided to check if they were outside, climbing up to the landing of the staircase. I opened a window that overlooked the street. As I looked out, I scanned the familiar road for the usual group of kids, but today they weren't there. Instead, I saw something else. Well, someone else. Standing in the distance was a figure that immediately struck me as wrong. The hair on the back of my neck prickled. This person's hair was wild and spiked, sticking out in unnatural directions. Their way of walking was unsteady and jerky, almost like they didn't know how to walk properly. That's not normal, I thought, growing a little concerned. It only took a second for me to decide that they were bad news, whoever they were. I didn't want them noticing us. I moved to close the window, but before I could, my sister, oblivious to the tension in the air, yelled out, "What are you doing up there?" Her voice echoed, sharp and loud. The figure came to a shambling stop and stood still. For the first time, I realized that it was a woman. Her head snapped towards us, and her face twisted into a wild expression. Her eyes locked onto ours, and then, without warning, she started to run, literally sprinting, straight towards our house. Panic surged through me. I slammed the window shut, and I grabbed my sister by the arm. "We have to go," I shouted, dragging her behind me. "What's going on? Why are we running?" she asked, confused and slightly annoyed. I didn't have time to explain. My only thought was getting us somewhere safe. I pulled her into our older sister room, where a hidden ladder led up to the attic. It was a space we sometimes used as a secret hideout, and it felt like our only option. "Get up there now," I ordered, practically shoving her towards the ladder. "What? Why? What's going on?" she kept asking. Again, I didn't have time to answer her. "Just stay there, don't come out, no matter what." Her wide, frightened eyes stared back at me, but she nodded. I closed the attic hatch and turned to lock the door behind me. That's when I remembered something that made my stomach drop. The front door. It was still wide open. But before I could even move, I heard it. The sound of heavy, uneven footsteps on the wooden floor downstairs. They were fast. Too fast. The footsteps reached the base of the stairs and began pounding up towards me. My whole body froze as fear rooted me into place. What do I do? What do I do? My mind raced, but I couldn't think of anything. Then came the banging. The woman reached the door of the room I was hiding in and began pounding on it, her fist slamming against the wood with a force that rattled the entire frame. The sound echoed through the house. It was this relentless, frenzied rhythm. I backed away from the door. I found myself beginning to hyperventilate. I just kept thinking of my sister in the attic, though. I had to hold it together for her. But it didn't stop there. After a few moments of silence, from outside I heard another sound, clinking. I turned to see rocks being hurled at the window. She was outside now, somehow throwing stones, as if trying to shatter the glass. I couldn't understand it. She was so fast. Was there more than one of her? Or was she just running around like crazy between the door and the window? The noise went on, the pounding at the door, the short interval, and then the rocks being thrown at the window. It felt like it would never end. After what felt like an eternity, maybe an hour, the sound stopped. Silence filled the air, and that silence was more frightening than the chaos that came before it. I didn't dare move. I felt so sad for my sister up in the attic. It was probably boiling hot up there. It wasn't until later that the police arrived. A neighbor must have heard the commotion, or saw some stranger coming and going from our house to our yard, and called the police. When they searched the area, they found no trace of the woman. She had vanished. To this day, no one knows who she was or where she came from. She was never caught, and no similar incidents were ever reported in our area, as far as I know. But I'll never forget the wild look in her eyes and the way she moved. Like she wasn't human. Even now, I can't leave my doors or windows open without feeling that same creeping fear. I lived in fear as a child, always wondering, what if she decides to come back?
This is a story that I heard from my friend Aiko. It happened back when she was single, living in an apartment without any fancy security system or any automatic locks. Just a typical building where if someone wanted to pay her a visit, they could walk right up to her door without much trouble. One night, a little after midnight, Aiko was winding down, getting ready to sleep. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, and the noise from the doorbell slicing through the quiet of her apartment. She froze, her mind racing. Who would come to my door at this hour? As she tried to shake off the initial shock, but then the bell rang again, followed by a knock, and then another, and another. Each knock felt louder and more insistent than the last, as if whoever was on the other side was growing more impatient. Aiko held her breath. She said that she froze in place and felt a shiver run right through her. She didn't dare move, but then something made her blood run cold. The narrow mail slot in her door suddenly opened, and she said that she could feel a presence on the other side, lurking and watching. Then a voice, a man's voice, low and rough, maybe in his 40s or 50s. I know you're in there. I saw the lights on. Just open up, will ya? Aiko's stomach twisted. She didn't recognize the voice. It was no one that she knew. Her head was filled with panicked questions like, why was he here? And how did he know that I was home? Did he also know that I was alone? Her heart pounded as she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Who are you? The man ignored her question, his tone shifting from coaxing to impatient. "Come on, let me in. Just open the door," he insisted. It was as if he couldn't understand why that she hadn't already done as he asked, as if he had every right to be there. That's when Aiko's brain got into gear and she reached for her phone. She grabbed it, dialing the police and making sure her voice was loud enough for him to hear. "I'm calling the police right now," she said, her voice trembling but firm. The moment the stranger on the other side of the door heard the word police, the man went silent. After a tense few seconds, Aiko heard his footsteps retreating down the hallway. She stayed on the line, her heart still racing, until an officer arrived to take her statement. The police assured her that they would increase patrols around her building and advised her to keep her doors tightly locked. Aiko thought that was the end of it, but the encounter left her shaken. She tried to push it to the back of her mind, telling herself that it was just a creepy one-time incident, but that feeling of being watched lingered. Aiko worked as an aromatherapy masseuse in a small cozy salon nearby. A few days later, a new client came in, a man in a business suit who looked like an ordinary office worker. But something about him felt off, though, and she couldn't shake the sense that she'd seen him somewhere before. Was he referred by one of her regulars? She wondered. After the session, the man smiled at her, his eyes lingering a bit too long. "I'm sorry about the other night," he said casually, as if they were discussing the weather. Aiko felt her heart skip a beat. "Excuse me?" she stammered, trying to keep her expression neutral. The man's smile widened, and he looked her directly in the eye. "You're really beautiful. I happened to see you around, and I got curious. So I did a little digging, found out where you live, where you work. I didn't mean to be so forward the other night, but, well, I'd had a few drinks." He said it all with a strange, almost friendly smile, as if his actions were nothing out of the ordinary. Aiko felt a wave of nausea. He didn't seem embarrassed or remorseful. In fact, he almost looked proud. Aiko took a step back, trying to keep her composure, but inside her mind was racing. She knew she couldn't go back to her apartment after this. That night, she packed a bag and then went to stay with her boyfriend, never setting foot in her own place again. Eventually, she left the job too, since she couldn't bear the thought of running into him again. As Aiko told me her story, she shivered, pulling her arms around herself as if to ward off a chill. "People like that, they have no clue that what they're doing is wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. And I can't imagine how scary that must have been for her.
I'm not sure if this really counts as a ghost story. It's not about spirits or anything supernatural, but honestly, I'm scared right now. Like, right now. Recently I started working from home, which has been great in some ways, but also it's made me notice how many random visitors show up during the day. Deliveries, sales pitches, subscription renewals, it's non-stop. To make things easier, I connected my door intercom to my PC so I could check who's at the door while working. If it's someone who looks annoying, I just ignore it and pretend I'm not home. Lazy, I know, but it works. But then I noticed something strange. Some visitors don't show up on the intercom camera. At first I thought it was just a weird angle thing. Maybe they were standing too close or slightly out of frame. But the thing is, the intercom camera has a wide fisheye lens that covers nearly the entire area in front of my door. Yet these people, or this person, always manages to stay just outside of its view. The only time I see them is when they leave, and even then, it's just a fleeting shadow disappearing from the frame. It started happening more often. Every few days, someone would come to the door and I'd see nothing on the intercom except for an empty porch. But when they left, there it was, the quick blur of movement. It was unsettling enough that I decided to take a peek for myself one day. The next time the intercom showed an empty feed, I crept up to the door and looked through the peephole. And that's when I saw it. A shadow, no, a person, pressed up against the door, standing on the hinge side, just barely out of view. They were so close that if I opened the door suddenly, I'd probably hit them. They weren't knocking, weren't ringing the bell, just standing there, completely still. Yesterday it happened again. This time the visitor rang the doorbell. I heard whoever was out there call out a company name. I ignored it. I was pretty busy and I wasn't interested in buying a newspaper subscription. When they finally left, someone else showed up. I decided to answer the door this time, because this guy was also claiming to be from the same newspaper company. I was getting pretty tired of the solicitation, so I opened the door and said, "Hey, someone from your company was just here." The guy gave me a weird look, and then he said, "I'm the only one assigned to this area." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" I asked him. "Someone was just here, standing out of view of my intercom, by the way, claiming to be from your company." I asked if there was any reason why someone else might be in his designated area by mistake, and he said no. The company didn't have all that many salespeople, so he didn't think it was possible. He frowned and said, "That's odd. I'll make sure to report it." And then he walked away, leaving me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. Then, tonight, it happened again. This time it was someone claiming to be from a cable company. But as soon as they spoke, I realized something. It was him. The voice was the same, the cadence, the tempo, the tone. I recognized it immediately as the fake newspaper salesman guy from yesterday. My blood ran cold. That wasn't the worst part though. As I sat there, staring at my empty intercom feed, a horrifying realization hit me like a brick. This wasn't the first time. The ones where someone stood just out of sight. It wasn't just a bunch of random people, it was always him. My hands are trembling as I type this. The house is dead silent, except for the faint hum of my PC. I keep glancing at the intercom feed, but there's nothing there. Just an empty porch. Do you know what's really unsettling though? I feel like I can hear faint breathing coming from the other side of the door. Hi, Jay here, with a little follow-up. That was the last post from this user. They never logged in or commented again. No updates, no explanation, nothing unfortunately. I hope they did the right thing and called the cops. And to this day, who knows what happened to them. All that remains is this story. The intercom feed, the shadow, the breathing. Did they open the door? Did whoever he was finally get inside? I guess we'll never know. This is a story about a strange and terrifying encounter that happened to us when we were in the 5th grade. It started as an ordinary afternoon. My friend and I were hanging out, sitting side by side in my room, deep into a gaming session. We were laughing, shouting at the screen, and completely absorbed in the game. Then out of nowhere, the keyboard stopped working. The keys felt stiff, unresponsive, as though something had jammed the entire system. At first, we didn't think much of it. Computers glitch all the time, right? We figured that it was just some technical hiccup, and went about trying to fix it. We had no idea that this was only the beginning. Just as we started rebooting the computer, the sharp chime of the doorbell echoed through the house. Ding dong. I glanced at my friend and he shrugged. I got up thinking it might be a delivery or a friend dropping by. I opened the door expecting to see someone standing there, but no one was there. The street outside was quiet. There was no footsteps, no voices, just empty air. For a moment, I thought it might have been a prank. Some kid playing Ding Dong Ditch or Knock Down Ginger. I laughed a little sarcastic laugh, and then I shut the door and went back inside. Not even a minute later, the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence, making us both jump. I walked over to pick it up, noticing that the caller ID said, "Private number." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the receiver, as an uneasy feeling crept over me. Who would be calling us from a blocked number? No one who called our house ever did that. "Just answer it," my friend said, trying to sound brave. So I did. "Hello?" I said. There was no reply. All I could hear was the steady, rhythmic sound of static. "Hello?" I repeated. Still nothing, just that same unsettling buzz in the background. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the call cut off with a loud click. By now, the playful atmosphere of the afternoon was completely gone. My friend and I looked at one another, our faces pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Neither of us had ever believed in ghosts or the supernatural. We were the kind of kids who rolled our eyes at people who claimed to see spirits or hear voices. Maybe that's why we started to rationalize it. "It's probably just someone messing with us," I said, trying to sound convincing. "Someone's just trying to scare us." "Yeah," my friend agreed. "Let's catch him in the act." We decided to fight back. I grabbed an old baseball bat from my closet, while my friend took position near the window, ready to spot anybody approaching the house. The doorbell rang again. This time, though, we were ready. I darted towards the front door, yanked it open as fast as I could. My heart was pounding, adrenaline surging, as I prepared to confront whoever was out there. But there was no one there, not a single soul. The only thing we found was a single drop of red. Blood. It was stark against the grey concrete of the porch. It was almost glistening under the weak afternoon light. I froze. My friend leaned over my shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. "Let's go back inside," he whispered. We bolted back into the house, slamming the door behind us. We didn't even bother trying to explain what we saw. We just scrambled under the kotatsu, trembling like little kids who had seen a monster. We stayed there for hours, clutching the bat and peering nervously around the room. The computer screen was still frozen. The phone was silent. The house was unnervingly still. And then, the doorbell rang again. Oh, we didn't move this time. We didn't even breathe. It's been years since that day, and I still don't know who or what was at the door. That drop of blood was the last sign we ever saw of it. Nothing else happened that night, but I didn't sleep a wink. I guess the same could be said about my friend too. Even now, every time I hear a doorbell, my chest tightens a little. I know it's silly, and sometimes when I pass by that old house that I grew up in, I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for someone to answer the door.
My wife and I have always been big on drinking. We each like to hit our own favorite spots on the weekends, sometimes coming back separately in the early hours. And last weekend was no different. We each went to our own bars. She doesn't like my bar too much because it's a sports bar, and plus, she has plenty of friends at her favorite bar. Anyway, I got home first, and around 1 a.m. I started to get sleepy, so I just went to bed without waiting for her. But not long after I drifted off, a loud knock on the front door pulled me right out of my sleep. I sat up, groggy but alert. I thought that it might be my wife, so I called through the door. "Is that you?" And I mentioned my wife's name. A woman's voice responded. It said, "Open up." Something about it didn't sit right with me. The tone, the way she said it, it felt off somehow. I frowned and I called again. "Who's there?" "Let me in," the voice drawled out, but it didn't sound any clearer. If anything, the voice was getting creepier. Now, let me explain something about our building. It's got a secure entrance, meaning anyone who doesn't live here can't just waltz in. Visitors have to get buzzed in by someone already inside, which means that if it wasn't my wife, this person shouldn't have been able to reach our front door at all. And to make matters stranger, there's no peephole in our door. So without the intercom camera, which they hadn't used, there was no way for me to see who was on the other side without opening it. Curiosity gave way to a rising sense of unease. Still, I tried one more time. "Hey." I then called out my wife's name and asked, "Is that really you?" I waited, tense. There was a pause and then the voice replied, "It's me. It's me." A chill ran down my spine. Something about her tone was disturbingly flat. I took a breath, backed away from the door, and I returned to the bedroom. I grabbed my phone and I called my wife, hoping to get some clarity. When she picked up, I was instantly relieved. She was still out with a mutual friend at one of our usual bars. I quickly explained what was happening as I listened to the increasingly loud pounding coming from the front door. "Stay there," I told her. "Don't come back until I call you again." And she agreed, saying that she would crash at her friend's place, which put me at ease. At least she was safe, but I wasn't. The knocking was relentless, each bang louder than the last, each hit against the door jarring me to my core. Summoning all the courage that I could, I went back to the door and I yelled, "Go away! I'm calling the police!" The knocking stopped. For a few heart-pounding seconds, I stood there in silence, clutching my phone. Then, without warning, there was a powerful, deafening thud, a kick by the sound of it, slamming against the door so hard that the whole thing shook. And then, silence. Nothing. I held my breath, listening intently. But it was like they just vanished into thin air. I waited a few minutes trying to hear if they were still in the building, and it was dead quiet, not a single sound from any nearby doors or hallways. After about 5 minutes of strained silence, I decided that it was probably safe and went back to bed, though I was far too wired to sleep. Just as I started to relax, a faint noise echoed from above me. Small, but unmistakable. It was a series of soft knocks, matching the exact rhythm that I had heard earlier. It was coming from the ceiling directly above the bedroom. This didn't make any sense. We live on the top floor. There is roof access, but to get up there, you would bring a ladder. There's absolutely no way anyone should be up there in the middle of the night. And yet the knocking continued. soft but insistent, as if someone was standing right above me, mimicking the same creepy rhythm from earlier. And I lay there, my heart racing, staring up at the ceiling, paralyzed by fear and also at points wrestling with my sanity. I had to keep asking myself if this was really happening or not. I mean, I guess I could have been hearing things, but I really don't think I was. Then, just as abruptly as it started, the sound stopped and silence fell heavy and suffocating. After a few minutes, I shakily picked up my phone and called my wife again. I told her everything that had happened and made her promise not to come home until morning. She promised and agreed to stay over at her friend's house, and I felt some relief knowing she wouldn't be in danger. But I was still trapped here. I thought about going out myself, maybe grabbing a late night drink to calm my nerves. But the idea of walking out of my front door from the safety of my place made my skin crawl. I couldn't bring myself to open it, not after everything that had happened. In the morning, once the sun was up and things felt somewhat safer, I contacted the building's management and asked if they could check the security footage. I also let them know that I wanted to file a report about a possible intruder. We agreed that they would review the footage and let me know if they found anything. I hoped maybe that they would see the person on camera, something that could explain what had happened to me. But they never found any evidence of anyone entering or leaving our building that night. No one. That was 2 weeks ago, and I still can't shake the feeling that someone or something was right there, just on the other side of that door, trying to get in. I'll be honest, we're thinking of moving. The lease is up in July, and I don't think that I can spend another night in that apartment. I plan to bring this whole incident up with the management, but in the back of my mind, I don't expect them to believe me. I really don't want whatever was out there to come back.
This story happened about 20 years ago, back in 2004, and to this day I still get chills thinking about it. At the time I was in my senior year of university, living at home in Mie Prefecture with my parents and my younger sister, who was in her second year at a junior college. We lived in a sizable 13-floor apartment building. To give you a sense of the layout, imagine a long hallway that stretched from the front door to the living room. My room was the closest to the front door, followed by my sister's room, and then the bathroom further down the hall. That summer was a big one. It was the first Olympics of the 21st century, the Athens Games. I'm a huge baseball fan, so I was glued to the screen, watching every match that featured Team Japan. But because of the 6-hour time difference with Greece, a lot of the games were broadcast in the middle of the night. One night the big semi-final match between Japan and Australia was on, and of course I was up in my room, nervously cheering for Japan. Somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, I started to feel the call of nature, so I got up to head to the bathroom. After finishing up, I was about to go back to my room when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something odd. The front door was unlocked and slightly open. The door wasn't completely closed, if you get what I mean. It struck me as strange. We always kept it locked, especially at night. Shrugging it off, I clicked the lock shut and went back to my room. As the game drew closer to its intense final moments, I was so focused that I nearly jumped out of my skin when the intercom buzzed out of nowhere. It was well past midnight and we weren't expecting anyone. But then I remembered my sister was out with her friends. She often stayed out late back then. and it wouldn't be unusual for her to come home at around that time. I guessed it was her who didn't shut the door properly then. Assuming it was her, I ignored the intercom, figuring she had her key, and she would let herself in, and maybe learn a lesson about locking up. But a minute later, the intercom buzzed again, then a third time. This game was really heating up, and I wasn't about to tear myself away from the screen over a few impatient rings. Besides, I thought surely someone else would get up. The intercom finally went silent, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then I heard the sound of someone jiggling the door handle, turning it over and over, as if trying to force their way inside. The sound was relentless, each twist of the handle growing louder and more frantic until it escalated into a series of loud bangs against the door. Annoyed and a bit unnerved, I gave in. Fine, I thought. I'll open the door, but she's getting an earful about this. With a sigh, I got up and went to the door and I unlocked it. I started to turn back towards my room, eager to not miss any more of the game than I had to, assuming she'd just walk in. But as I turned, I heard the front door open behind me. I was about to mutter something about her late-night noise, but when I glanced over my shoulder, my words froze in my chest. Standing in the doorway wasn't my sister. It was a man. A total stranger. He was dressed in slacks but shirtless, his hair disheveled, and his face slightly flushed, as if he had been drinking. I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at him, trying to process what I was seeing. He looked back at me with an expression that shifted from confusion to realization, his eyes darting around as if he had made a terrible mistake, and then he stammered, "Oh, sorry, I thought..." Then, almost comically, he looked down at the newspaper sticking out of our mail slot, pulled it out and mumbled, "Morning paper delivery." And then he handed it to me. I reached out without thinking, muttering a faint, "Thank you," as my mind reeled. We stood there in awkward silence for a few moments, neither of us sure what to do. Then, with a sheepish nod, the man quickly turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. When I finally shut the door, I felt a shiver run through me. I had been so focused on the game, so sure that it was my sister at the door, that I'd never even considered the possibility of it being someone else. What if he hadn't been so harmless? What if he had a weapon? I couldn't stop imagining how easily the situation could have taken a darker turn. Later I reasoned that the man was probably drunk and mistaken our apartment for his own. Maybe he'd forgotten his key and resorted to banging on the door, hoping that someone would wake up and let him in. But the thought haunted me for days. I kept wondering, what if I hadn't noticed the door was unlocked earlier? What if he hadn't been just a confused, tipsy guy? What if he did have something on his mind and he didn't expect to see someone awake that late at night, and he knew the door was unlocked? Even now, 2 decades later, that night plays back in my mind from time to time, always making me double-check my door before I go to bed. Oh, and in case you're wondering, Team Japan lost to Australia that night. It was a rough night all round. It was a little after 2:30 in the morning when something strange happened. I woke up abruptly, jolted out of a deep sleep by the sharp clanging of metal. It was loud, unmistakable, and it sounded like something striking the metal frame of my bed. My heart raced as I sat up, fumbling for the light switch. With the room illuminated, I scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. No sign of anything that could have caused the sound. But I knew what I'd heard. It was loud enough to have been real. Was it a dream? I thought to myself. Could it have been one of those strange auditory hallucination dreams? I'm hoping people understand what I mean here. I sighed and just turned off the light, deciding to try to get back to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. My mind buzzed, replaying the sound over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Just as I was about to drift off again, I noticed it. A faint sound coming from outside my apartment door. It was subtle at first, like the rustle of cloves or the creak of soft floorboards. The noise was coming from the hallway near the elevator. It wasn't unusual for sounds to echo through the building, but this was different. I live on the 5th floor, and there are only 2 units here, mine and another, which is an office that's completely vacant at night. Then I remembered something. The door. I forgot to lock the door. I mean, I say I forgot, but the truth is I regularly left it unlocked. I know that's such a dumb thing to do, but because no one was really up here on my floor at night, I just got into a habit of not caring about it, and it proved to be my undoing. Panic gripped me. I was still sitting upright, incredibly still, with my breath held. In bed, when I heard the faint creak of my apartment door opening. The door eased open slowly, deliberately, and a figure stepped inside. The dim light from the hallway cast the silhouette of a woman into my room. She looked to be in her 20s. She was tall and slender, with long flowing hair. Her movements were graceful, almost unnaturally so. She wore slim black slacks and a crisp white blouse, her clothes hanging on her model-like form. For a moment I was struck by how beautiful she seemed, at least from what I could make out in the dim shadows, but that thought quickly evaporated as the reality of my situation sank in. I didn't know this woman, and she had just invaded my home in the dead of night. A dozen possibilities raced through my mind in the span of a heartbeat. Had she mistaken my apartment for someone else's? Was this a burglar? A stalker? She didn't seem aggressive. There was no air of menace around her, but her presence felt deeply wrong. Something about her silence, her calm demeanor, sent a chill down my spine. She had no nervousness about her. She walked in as if she owned the place, or as if she had done this before. If she was a ghost, I reasoned, then she wouldn't need to open the door, I guess. That made her presence somehow even more unsettling. She took a step further into the room, her figure just still visible in the dim light. "Hello?" I said, suddenly, trying to keep my voice firm but quiet. I tried to keep my voice steady, and I followed it up with, "Who are you?" My hand slid discreetly towards my bedside table, where my practice katana, a dull blade I keep for training, was within my reach. My room was dark, and I knew that she couldn't see me from where she stood. "I made a mistake," she said simply. Her voice had a faint foreign accent, almost melodic, but distant, like she wasn't entirely there. She turned and walked out, just as quietly as she had entered. The door didn't slam. It didn't even click shut. She just slipped out. And she was gone, leaving only silence behind her. I sat there for a long time, too stunned to move. My mind replayed everything in vivid detail. The sound of her voice, the shadow she cast in the doorway, the grace of her movements. The next day I called the building manager to check the security footage, but when we reviewed the tapes, there was no sign of her. Nothing on the cameras near the elevator, nothing at the front entrance. Either she knew how to stay out of sight of them, or she wasn't ever there at all. To this day I don't know who or what she was, but sometimes when I lie awake at night, I can still hear that first metallic clang, echoing in my mind, as if it were a warning. Well, maybe it was.